The Rant Podcast is brought to you by CubsInsider.com. Welcome to The Rant. Welcome, everyone, to The Rant. It's Saturday. It's Sunday, November 3rd. The first weekend following Halloween. My son is very excited for the Simpsons Halloween special that's on today. And so that's what we're looking forward to today, Evan.
Nice. I'm good. This is also the first weekend following the World Series, and between today and yesterday, because of the timing of the 2016 World Series, we get 2 days to celebrate the anniversary of the Cubs winning the greatest championship ever in the history of American sports. So that's pretty cool.
It is cool. Yeah, I love it. I always love it. It's like a bittersweet, though, right? Because like it was really cool to celebrate. It is really cool to celebrate and fun and everything like that. But then it's also like annoying that we have to continue to celebrate something that we felt there would be more than one of.
Yeah, and the fact that it was 8 years ago, right? Like it every time we celebrate that anniversary gets farther and farther away, and so do the Cubs seemingly get farther and farther away from returning, or at least not any closer, right? And if you're not getting any closer, you are getting farther away. And so it is, and it's one of those things too. And of course, it was funny, right? And it came back up again, obviously with it being the anniversary, and also the Dodgers were, reportedly had like 1 million people at theirs, and then you go back and the Cubs had like 6 million or whatever. It's like the 7th largest gathering of humans in recorded history. And so it's a little bit different, but it's the Dodgers' first legitimate one, but second one since 2020 there, since they did win in the short season. And so although that whole season, like I was looking at this today because I was writing up some stuff about the Cardinals and trying to trade some dudes, that whole 2020 season still remains like almost entirely blacked out to me. Right. Like I remember it. I went to the game that the Cubs were eliminated because the Cubs, as you recall, were the only team where people could even be in attendance at all because you get rooftop seats. And so I got rooftop seats courtesy of Red Bull, which is a pretty cool little deal. But it was like the worst game ever, right? The Cubs got shut out, swept by the Marlins. And it was just like a brutal finish to the season. And so maybe because of that, I pretty much just blacked it all out. But anyway,
that's well, you should have. And really the beginning, well, no, it wasn't the beginning of the end, but it was the end of the end. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, the following season, obviously they traded away everyone in 2021, I believe, right?
Yeah, now we're here.
Now we're here. I was in Chicago in 2021 when they traded away everyone. And I just remember it was like all the news was just breaking so quickly. Because there's like one after another after another.
Oh yeah.
And my kids were breaking down so quickly because it was one after it's like first the Rizzo, then you had Javi,
Bryant, yeah. Well, and because Rizzo was the first one, right? Because he was like 2 days before the trade deadline or whatever. Like he went, and then that was because Bryant got the news. He flew with the team to Washington. Remember that they flew to Washington, and then he was like, because that's when the deadline was happening. I think it was that afternoon or whatever. And he was in uniform, or at least in his warm up stuff for BP and whatnot, and got the news like in the Cubs.
Yeah, in the dugout,
which was just
they did the hug,
super bizarre
hug watch.
Yeah, and it was just such an odd the whole thing, right? To kind of look back on, and to think that was even then, right? We've said it's 8 years since they won, and like that, the 21, we're talking that was still 5 years removed from the World Series. Like they had another 5 years. And that's the part that still is baffling me, right? Like you had all those guys still, but that's where it's like that failure to continue to, and again, some of those players whether it's from injuries or whatever else, did not develop and improve beyond what we saw in 2016. But the fact that they did that with those guys who were all so young, and the fact that they had even come in and added, whether you're talking Yu Darvish or some other guys, but they did so in a manner that just turned out to be unsustainable. And now we're seeing sort of this opposite, where it's like they don't have any of those superstars. Like, there's nobody on this team who you can look at and be like, oh yeah, that's good. And then how do you find those guys? Can you develop them? But then do you have any room? They don't have a team where you could call up 3 or 4 prospects and give them immediate playing time like they were able to in 2015.
Yeah, and that's the problem.
Interesting deal, to look at it still. I'm looking at it like, it's been 8 years, man. I can't look into the future and tell you confidently that within the next 2 to 3 years, the Cubs will have a team that we could look at in a similar fashion.
Yeah, and then it seemed like the downfall to me for the Cubs really started with the Jose Quintana trade. And where they traded Cease away. And Cease turned out to be just obviously a stud, and Eloy Jimenez, or a player that Quintana came over and was not good, just wasn't good. Certainly not worth the haul they traded. And that year was 2018, right? When they went to Los Angeles and lost. Really lost a series that they really could have and should have won. It was, what was it, going into extra innings, and they put in Joe Madden who did he bring in a starter? The guy from the Cardinals.
Lackey. You do the 17.
Lackey, yeah.
17.
Yeah. Oh, was that 17? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, in 17 they should have won, and then 18 they traded for Quintana, right? Do I have my dates right? Yeah.
Should I again, like, my brain is smooth like an egg, so I only remember certain things.
That seems about right. And so it's like,
18
I guess
was when they choked down the stretch, and then lost to the Brewers in game 163, and then got shut out by the freaking Rockies. When we had the 1-game wild card setups back then. And then it was, the 19 they kind of fell off a cliff, and then 20 they bounced back. But yeah, realistically, I mean, I look at a couple different things. I look at that. So if you look at 17, then 8, but when we look at like that, the turning point for me, I know you mentioned Quintana. My big turning point was a move they failed to make, which was heading into 2019. When Bryce Harper wanted to be a Cub. He wanted to be there. And they simply didn't put out, there were meetings reportedly, and I think there were talks, but like at that point, right, they had signed Yu Darvish the previous year. They still had Jason Hayward. And again, a lot of people say, oh, those contracts were albatrosses, whatever. Like, the Cubs could have made it work, especially when Harper wanted to be there. Right. And when you look at it now, and at the time that seemed like a whole bunch of money, $330 million, 13 years, whatever. But the dude is making less money per year than Dansby Swanson over the next 5 years, right? Or 4 years or whatever. Like, they could have had Harper starting in 2019. What does the trajectory look like? How does that change things if they make that move? And again, I think that was purely on ownership, because Theo Epstein, and I shouldn't be bitching about this at all, so I'll shut up pretty quickly. But Epstein effectively made it sound like they would have the flexibility to go and get Harper. I feel like the goalposts got moved on him at that point, and that to me is when we really saw the degradation of this club into what it's become and what it's now trying to dig back out of. Because at that point, they made a very conscious decision to not get Bryce Harper. And I just think if you add that superstar right there, right? Like, do they win more World Series? I don't know, but I think that would at least show that willingness. It would have brought more people around. It would have allowed them to maybe keep some of those other guys, and to have another, a bona fide superstar to kind of help them well into the future. But alas, He's in Philly. The Cubs are without a star, and you know, we'll deal with whatever.
It's kind of it's like almost linear though. Like I'm looking at it, kind of just jotted some notes down here. So in 2017, when the Cubs brought in John Lackey in that extra innings game, really felt like a failure, and he gave up the game-winning home run.
Was that to Turner? Justin Turner hit the home run against
to Justin Turner, and Lackey wasn't strong that year. I mean, he was like kind of on and off, and he just that wasn't the right time to bring him in. So that was a mistake. 2018, the Quintana trade. 2019, Harper. 2020, Kyle Schwarber, and non-tendering Kyle Schwarber.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty linear.
Yeah, there's
a few other things that happened, and then in 2021, the Cubs traded everyone away.
Yeah, and I mean, and you know, think about that, and it's kind of ironic that then the two guys there, you know, the moves they didn't make are the ones that they effectively let walk away, or you know, in one way or another, both ended up in Philly, right? And I wrote something up the other day, you know, just and it kind of just around Juan Soto, who, you know, the Cubs are unlikely to pursue, which I know like a lot of people get upset about this, and somebody was like even trying to push back on me about it. It's like, I think it's going to end up being like an Ohtani situation where it didn't matter what the Cubs were going to offer because he was never going to sign anywhere other than LA. Right. And I think Soto wants to stay in New York, whether it's the Yankees or the Mets. I think he just prefers the East Coast. That's what all the reports seem to be. I know there's stuff about Toronto maybe offering. The Dodgers could get in, but the whole thing with that too, again, the reporting is like they want to gauge whether or not he would even come to LA, and he may not. But I don't think it even matters, right? Because the Cubs could offer whatever, some astronomical figure. At least two other teams out there could offer the same. And if you look at it, again, a lot of people like to dump on the Mets, myself included, but as the roster is currently set up, they're much more competitive, you know, maybe depending on what happens with Alonso or whatever, but you've got an owner who is the richest in all of baseball, who's clearly willing to spend money, right? The Yankees are clearly set up to be more competitive. The Dodgers are clearly set up to be more competitive. If you have a dude who wants to win and you give him those, you know, the two New York teams, the Dodgers and the Cubs, which of those is he going to be able to walk into and know that he can win immediately? It ain't the Cubs. Like, they're a distant fourth on that list to me. You know, some people are like, well, he could be the man here. It's like, yeah, dude, he went to New York and played behind Judge, where he clearly wasn't the man. I mean, he's played behind Harper, you know, when he first came up. Now, when they won, Harper was gone, and Soto was kind of the man there, but he played in San Diego, where he had multiple superstar level players. So I don't think it's got anything to do with that. Yeah.
That's the problem with Soto. Soto is kind of like a piece that you add to a team that's already got power, right? Like, and I think that's why he did so much better with the Yankees than he did with the Padres. You know, and he did well with Washington. To your point, he had some protection there. Like, you put him in the Cubs lineup and there's still no protection for him necessarily, right? Like, who's the protection for him?
Right. And that's, you know, and that's the same thing. And I, you know, hey, I can respect some people. Like, there's a lot of folks who want him in Chicago. I want the Cubs to give him 600, 700 million, whatever it is. Cause I mean, it's not my money. And especially if they can defer it, you know, the present value makes it way lower. Like, they could potentially get him for something in the neighborhood of 43 million AAV. To me, that's a no brainer, but they still have a lot of work to do. Like, put him on this Cubs roster right now, it's still not nearly as good as the two teams we just saw in the World Series.
Exactly.
Right? Like, look at, they had Judge and Soto and Stanton. The Cubs don't have anybody who's as scary as any of them. Yeah, and they still lost to a team that has Mookie Betts and Shohei Ohtani and Freddie Freeman, who went just absolutely insane with like 6 straight homers. So it's like, or 6 straight games with homers. Again, the Cubs have no one who's close to the level of Betts, Freeman, or Ohtani. And the Dodgers have all 3 of those guys, right? So it's like, yeah, you can get Soto and you can pay him all that, but you still got a lot of other work to do. And the flexibility to do that was just decreased by the fact that Cody Bellinger opted back in. And so, I as strange as this sounds, they're probably better off, not being able to get Soto, because if they did, a lot of people are like, oh, well, now the Bellinger's back, Ricketts won't spend. Okay, well, that's foolish, I think. But if they were to commit, the largest contract in club history, 3 times more than what they've ever paid anybody with him, I think that would severely limit their ability to go out and get other guys. So if there's a shot at it, but I think they're going to have to be very, very open, or very, very active in the trade market, because there's just really, it's tough for me to see where they go from here and how they can make those improvements, but they're going to have to continue to add, which is going to be very tough because there's not a whole lot of room to do that at this point. So, it's going to be an interesting winter. That's for sure. I hope it's interesting. It kind of has to be.
Exactly.
Like, it has to
Well,
be.
I mean, and the Cubs can't value their way into the World Series. I mean, if there's anything we saw in this World Series, and to your point of all the superstar players on both teams, is like, when was the last time you had a team that kind of had value players that won the World Series? I mean, I'm looking at the list here. The Nationals, maybe, but they didn't really, right? That was a solid team with a lot of really good players. I mean, maybe
And they had, they did a lot of that was with pitching, right? Because they had Scherzer at his prime, they had Steven Strasburg in his prime, and then now I can't even remember for the life of me who their number 3 was. Oh my goodness, it's killing me. Former Diamondbacks pitcher, but anyway, but they had like 3 of the top 5 NL Cy Young vote getters. Right. So it's like that, and then, Soto and some decent dudes on the roster. Otherwise, in the lineup, they were able to kind of pitch their way there. I would say, like, hey, the Diamondbacks recently, right? Like, they kind of valued their way in there. I mean, they had some stars, and obviously Corbin Carroll, got a big extension from them, but
they didn't win.
They didn't. No, yeah, they got there. And they got beat by a team that paid a ton of money for a bunch of free agents, right? And you look up and down, like when I looked at this, and I didn't look at every single team, but the Cubs right now have one player with a 9-figure deal, right? That's Dansby Swanson. Nobody else even close. I mean, I guess Cody Bellinger at 80 million possible, but that's still not close to 9 figures. And you look at like the Phillies and Dodgers, I think have 6 apiece. The Mets have like 4 or 5. The Yankees have 4 or 5. The Padres have several, right? Like, these teams don't just sign one big money player and then say, cool, we'll surround you by value-based guys and go with that. Right? Like, no, it's, you keep adding good players. That's the way this works. Right? Like, you can luck into it one season at a time. Again, like the Diamondbacks, right? And that's kind of the thing. Or you look at the Royals, right? Or the Guardians? Do we trust those teams? I would be hard pressed to even see a scenario in which the Guardians are still as competitive next year as what they were.
Yeah.
Right. Or the Royals, like that. You get flashes in the pan, but if you go out and sign legit, and for all his struggles, like Dansby Swanson ended up leading the club in WAR. A lot of that's based defensively, but if his offense, if he hadn't struggled so badly in the first half, like his second half
almost
was really
all
good offensively,
but yeah.
His first half was terrible. His second half was really good, similar to Pete Crow Armstrong. And that's, one of the issues people have brought up. Like, I looked at it, and then I had some guy who I think is like maybe not even, I don't even know, he's a young guy, said something like, son, if that's your understanding. Well, I'm like, first of all, buddy, I'm probably twice your age. Listen, maybe not call me son, but I'm like, I'm not presenting WAR as a direct correlation of like, this is how many wins this is worth. But where I'm looking at it is, and we talked about this on our last episode, this idea that the Cubs have very finite room to outperform expectations, right? And when you look at the 2 guys who you could on that roster, the only 2 that you could reasonably see reaching 6 WAR are Swanson and PCA. Yeah. The only 2. Like, I don't think anybody else you could reasonably project for even 5 or more. And the problem with that is that neither of them achieves that value through offense alone, right? It's largely defensive based. Take away the gloves, and now you're talking about very, mediocre-ish, like okay, league average-ish, slightly above offensive producers, maybe. And so therein lies the problem. You're looking at a team that, as of right now, is constructed like some team in the 80s, right? Where the defense up the middle, I mean, you got gold glovers, second base, shortstop, and in center. But it's so based on defense. The offense, like Nico Horner's never going to hit for any power. PCA is he's got some pop, but it's limited. Dansby Swanson, if he gets 20 home runs, that would be a pretty, like a really, not a big surprise, but like that would be a huge value add if that's the case. So that's like how teams got built in the 80s. But those teams also had tremendous power at all the corners. The Cubs don't have much power at all. Yeah, and you got to have the pitching, right?
Dominant pitching, and that's the problem. And so you've got Bellinger exercised his $27.5 million player option for 2025. I think that caught a lot of people off guard because most of the pundits were saying that the word was he was actually going to opt out, and then he didn't. And man, that tells you a lot, because it's like, I mean, when you look at that decision from Cody Bellinger's perspective, right? I mean, it makes me feel like he's either going to have an outstanding year in 2025. I mean, maybe he's thinking, you know what, it'll be better than 2024, right? And so maybe he's thinking that's a year to build off of versus 2024, where he was down versus 2023. And so maybe he's thinking he pops back up in 2025 and shows a little bit more power, and it gets his average back up there. But if that doesn't happen and he's right around where he was in 2024, he's opting in again for 2026.
Yeah.
And so that's something that the Cubs have to take into consideration. And to your point, like as we go through all these different scenarios and options for the Cubs, that's a big kind of pole in the tent there that is restrictive, because you have to have Bellinger on the roster. Obviously, you've got to pay him $27.5 million. And then what that's doing is it's blocking a lot of other players. And so the point there is that the Cubs are really in a situation where, like, in order to really improve the power on the team, they're going to have, they don't have that in the minor league system that's visible, at least, and obvious, and they don't have that on the team. And so what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to pull it in from trades. And it's like, man, if the Cubs don't pull any like substantive trades in this offseason, and it's kind of like last offseason where it was like nothing really happened, and really the last mini off seasons, actually, with the exception of Bellinger, it feels like the Cubs, their trajectory is just kind of like status quo, right? It's like, how do you get to that next level without pulling off some pretty big trades?
Yeah, I mean, they kind of have to, right? Because if you look at their position players, who's gone? Nobody's gone. The entire roster of main everyday position players is all back.
Yep.
With Bellinger coming back, right? And do they upgrade at backup catcher, or get somebody to be at least the timeshare or the primary, and Miguel Amaya as the backup? Like, okay, maybe, but like, who are you getting? Is that player? Does the player even exist who all of a sudden elevates that tremendously? No, a little bit better, but it's not like we're talking about Mike Piazza being out there and hitting 50 bombs, a lot of people are talking about.
You've got Ballesteros who's tearing it up in the AFL.
But he can't really catch. That's the only problem.
Exactly. And your DH, and now that you've got Bellinger,
Suzuki's got a DH.
Suzuki's the DH.
Now, some people have said
Suzuki's not great in right field anyways.
No, and that's fine. But then the other thing, this is another one that I've heard, is like, okay, well, trade Horner, put Bellinger at first, move Bush to second, and then have Casey play right field. Okay, well, now you've downgraded your defense. Like I don't. Casey's gotten better, but I don't expect him to be. Like maybe he'll be as good as Suzuki was. But like Bush turned himself into a Gold Glove first baseman. Bellinger's very good over there, so that's not much. But then you're talking about one of the best defensive second basemen in baseball, and Nico Horner, who got screwed out of the Gold Glove voting this year. But like Bush isn't going to be as good of a defensive player as Horner was. Now you're downgrading that. You're not necessarily improving your power because, I mean, yeah, would it be great? Like, does Casey have 60 grade power potential? Yes, but can you reasonably expect that out of a rookie? Is he going to produce better out there? Then they're like, well, you could just, but then what do you do with Matt Shaw? Well, you can play him at third. Okay. But is his defense at third where it's not expected to be great? So are we talking about another Morel situation defensively, right? He's not going to be as good defensively as Isaac Paredes, even though we saw a lot of struggles from him. And then offensively, I still want them to move Paredes at this point because I think, like, if you look at it, for him to reach kind of that 4 WAR potential, even like 4 to 4, he's got to hit 35 homers. And I was not sold on that trade from the start. I didn't like it. I still don't really like it. And I think he can be fine. He can be a decent player. But with his super, super pull heavy approach in a ballpark that doesn't play very well for that, particularly with the wind doing what it's done. And who knows that, the environment could shift a little bit next year. Maybe that changes, but unless he learns to go oppo and use those gaps more, I just don't see how there's any way that Paredes actually reaches kind of where he was able to be with the Rays. I just don't see it. So would I rather have them upgrade with Shaw? Sure. But what do you do with Triantos? What do you do with Alcantara? Where are these guys going to go? I've said all along that multiple of their top 6 are going to have to be traded. Like Ballesteros might be one, because where's he going to play? He's like 5'9" and 260 pounds. Do you want a 5'9" first baseman? I mean, like I joked about the guy who said Matt Shaw was too short to play, or I'm sorry, Michael Bush was too short to play first base. And so Ballesteros certainly is, but he can't be a major league catcher next year. You can't put him at first. He can be a DH, but then we're like the construction of the current MLB roster and the spots of their current top prospects are very much to me in misalignment right now.
Well, they're kind of in like a reverse situation where they were in 2021 when they traded everyone away, right? And they got all these prospects who were like prospects, and they weren't anywhere near MLB ready. And now it's different because now you do have, if you want to call them prospects still, that's fine, but they're players that are pretty much MLB ready, right? I mean, they need to be playing in the major leagues, and they've got a whole bunch of them, as you just named. And so it's like, but you look at the current roster and you've got it filled with other players. It's like something's going to have to give. My concern and my biggest worry is that Jed makes trades that are bad, because the Cubs have. I'm trying to think of like, okay, they made good. I guess they made good trades. It's hard to say, like, what they got for all the players that they traded away in 2021. We can go back and look at every single one of them.
The PCA deal should end up being way better. Like that's the one.
Yeah, the Javier Baez trade.
They got Kevin Alcantara for
definitely better.
Yeah, but I mean, like what the Bryant deal got him Canario and Caleb Killian, but like Canario's done. Where's he gonna? He's an outfielder who now isn't just behind the 3 guys who were there, or 4 or 5 if we put in Talkman at the major league level. He's not even in their top 30 prospects anymore, I don't believe. So he's buried behind at least 2 other young outfielders. Like he's going to get the same treatment like that,
but he's got a high ceiling
as Velasquez. He does. They got to move him. He has to be traded. That's the problem.
Is you're going to have to trade him for next to nothing. You're never going to get the value for a guy like Canario.
They wanted to trade him before he got hurt. Yeah, if he hadn't gotten hurt a couple winters ago, they would have moved him. And then they got screwed. They couldn't trade him because he was rehabbing, right? And then And then his performance kind of dropped off a little bit, and strikeouts went way up, and the power's down a little, and he was hurt again last year. So now you're still like, and that is my fear, right? How many times we see like you're trying to wait and wait and wait until the value is right, and you can move these guys at a premium. But if you wait too long, you end up screwing yourself. Like something bad can happen, and now you're left with nothing. And I fear that they are so worried that they're going to trade one of these. And I'm oversimplifying, and I don't think Jed Hoyer stays up at night like freaking out that he's going to trade a dude who's going to become an all-star immediately. But I do think, and as we go back to threading the needle, Hoyer wants to thread that needle so badly that it's like these two extremes. Either you flip a guy, you get crap in return, and that guy gets traded away and becomes a star, or you hold on to these prospects for so long and you don't have any room for them in Chicago, and then they play their way out of their value in the minors, and now you can't move them for anything, right? And so now you're left with nothing. It's this paralysis by analysis. I'm that to me is going to be what Jed Hoyer does with those top 6 prospects this offseason is going to tell to me, and maybe I'm being a little bit hyperbolic here, but I think that's going to determine the Cubs' trajectory for the next 3 to 5 years.
Well, and the Cubs, it kind of seemed like they've missed big time, because when they traded away their core and they got all these prospects, and then they didn't really do anything with them. They just kind of let them develop and stew, right? And now we're in a situation where it's like, all right, we need people on the major league roster. You've got people who are blocked. You've got, if you're a GM from another organization who wants to trade for somebody that's in the Cubs system, you're saying, like Canario is a good example. You're saying you can go get him on the value, no doubt about it, because what else are the Cubs going to do? I mean, the only way that the Cubs either have to trade somebody that's in front of Canario, or they have to trade Canario for a deal. And if you look at who the Cubs have traded, the trades that Cubs have made over the last few years, they haven't gotten any impact players. What do they got? Carlos Guzman, or they traded Guzman for McKinstry, and they had McKinstry, and they traded him, and then they traded for Candelario for Hers and Made, and they've done these things, they've done these trades, but they haven't gotten anybody impactful. When was the last impactful trade the Cubs made?
I mean, the Bush trade was decent, but we don't even know what's going to happen with him yet. Like, he's a good player, but yeah, but like you said, I mean, as far as truly being impactful, I mean, I would say if PCA continues to develop the way I believe he will, then that moving Javi Baez for him, like, again, I talked about him being probably and possibly in the entire system, the entire organization. And that's where I look at it, like he might be the only one capable of 6 WAR type output. Now, so like, again, that's where somebody got pissy with me. I'm like, obviously you didn't read the rest of the thread here, buddy, because I laid this all out. But he could be, perennial Gold Glover. So I would say that. But outside of it, and what I go back to though is, because they've made a lot of kind of safe deals, but that's the problem, is like they moved Darvish and Victor Caratini to the Padres. I think Casey's the only one left from that deal who's even still in the organization, maybe even in professional baseball, right? And he's still not up. We just mentioned it, like Canario has looked good in flashes. Killian has never been able to put it together at the highest level. That was the Bryant deal, and then Alcantara was the Rizzo deal, right? So I mean, there again, he could be a dude, but we looked at, like, when the news broke, we were on our show when they traded Scotty Efros for Hayden Wesneski. That looked like it could be good at first, but Wesneski's never been able to put it together consistently. I mean, they've had some good moves. I think that at least, even though I'm not a huge fan of it, at least the Paredes move and trading Chris Morel and doing all that, like, it was an aggressive move by Hoyer, but I don't think that that's something that, even if he hits his upside, that Isaac Paredes, I don't think could be a true impact player. So yeah, like,
Yeah.
and when people keep talking about it, is Vlad Guerrero Jr. Can you go out and get him? That continues to stand out to me as like the one obvious move they might be able to make, unless it's like Brent Rooker. That's another one that people are looking at. Are there some dudes out there that the Cubs could go get? Like, but again, I don't. Do you trust? I'll just flat out ask it. I won't say it myself. Do you trust Jed Hoyer to go out and make? It's probably gonna have to be like 2 aggressive trades that like are super, super high risk. We're talking about maybe moving at least 1 or 2 of those top prospects and probably a major league player in order to get somebody who, at least from a potential standpoint, markedly improves the roster. Do you believe Hoyer has the balls, the moxie to do that?
The skill? No, I don't. And I mean, the trades, the moves that Hoyer has made since he took over really feel more like the moves the Cubs should have been making back when they had the core in place. Like the moves, the players that the Cubs have gotten and acquired and since 2021 basically really are players that you add to a core, right?
Yeah.
Like this is the thing that was missing, that when the Cubs had the core in place after 2016, that never could happen, right? Like they just made bad trades. Like, I mentioned the Quintana trade. They just couldn't get the right pieces to add to the core where they needed to kind of plug. But now what they're doing is they're doing the thing that they should have done when they had the core, but they don't have a core. And so if there's one thing that Hoyer has shown us, it's that he knows prospects and he can trade for prospects. And when I say a prospect, I'm talking about somebody who's 2 to 3 years away from the major leagues. And he can do that. But I mean, the Paredes deal is a perfect example. Like that just didn't feel right from the very beginning. And yeah, like he came on, the last month he played a lot better. We don't know if he's that same guy for the entire season next year, then that'd be great. And maybe it works out, but it's still not a guy that's like changing your team into a championship caliber team. And so to your point, yeah, I mean, that's kind of where we are right now, right? Like we've got a bunch of complementary pieces to what could be a championship team, but we don't have a core. And that's what we're talking about here, right? Is the Cubs need to go out and get the core. Because really, what is the core? If you look at the team right now and you were to say the core is basically PCA, maybe Michael Busch, and all the guys in the minors.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at it long term, although, I mean,
4 years, 3, 4
Hap would
years.
be one of those guys, but yeah, he's only signed for another 2 years, right? I mean, it's Swanson's got to be there, but that's, I guess, the other issue is, right, like if you look back and you look at that 2015 team where they were able to bring up Bryant and then they brought up Russell and then they brought up Schwarber, right? They were able to do that because they had the veteran leadership. Rizzo had already established himself. You had Ben Zobrist in there. You had Dexter Fowler out in center, right? You get some of these guys. You had John Lester. You had David Ross. Like there were a bunch of these veterans, many of whom were still very, very good, right? And you were able to sort of bring these dudes up. And Schwarber came, later in the year when they were kind of able to make that work. But you could have a team at which, right, you could, and Javi came up along with those guys, right? You were able to bring these young guys in because you had a few spots where it's like, okay, there was clearly a potential to make an upgrade. Mike Olt started the season as the third baseman. And interesting story because I've been in communication with Mike Olt very recently because
Run into him in a bar.
I ran into a bar in Mesa in 2015. And now he works in sales for Pelotero, which is a youth development player performance app. And so yeah, so like, and we use that through my son's travel organization, and I've written up a couple of stories for him on Cubs insider, and then Mike followed me, and I know some of the guys who work over there. Anyway, weird that we've been connected there, but like that was a clear potential to upgrade with KB coming up. But the problem that they're in, and this is what we keep coming back to, right? They have a roster filled with good, not great players. Every single spot, every spot is filled with good, not great players. And so there is nowhere
they're committed to.
Right. They're all under contract, no, for beyond this year. At none of those spots can you definitively say, right? Oh, Matt Shaw is an obvious upgrade over, insert name here. Is it Horner? Is it Paredes? Whatever. Or that Owen Casey is an obvious upgrade, because they're not. Like, potential wise, and I'm really high on Matt Shaw. But if we're talking about a team that needs to go and win right now, different story if we're talking 3 years ago. We're not. We're talking about a team that has won 83 games twice in a row, which, mediocre as it is at least above 500, that truly needs to win next year. What spot on the roster right now can you look at and say, if I insert prospect X from the top of the rankings over current MLB player Y, it's going to yield a better team? And I don't think you can reasonably do that anywhere.
And
right,
therein
for
lies
this season. And that's the
problem with the construction of this roster. And what was the vision that Jed Hoyer had when he was constructing this roster? Because to your point, right? I mean, you look at Seiya Suzuki, right? What he got 3 more years, something like that.
2 more, yeah.
You've got Bellinger, who just opted in, is probably going to opt in again the following
unless they trade
him. Yeah.
Which they should, in my opinion. But anyway.
Suzuki has a no trade clause. You've got Ian Happ that has a no trade clause, right? You signed Dansby Swanson, and so to a multi-year deal. And so, what was the vision, right? When Hoyer was putting this roster together, was he had to be thinking this was a roster that was going to be the team, right? That got to the playoffs. But then, like, was he discounting all of the players he had traded the core away for? Like, all the players in the minor leagues? Did he forget about that? Because it kind of seems like he kind of like he dropped the ball there, right? Like, to your point, like, the roster we're kind of stuck with a team here that the Cubs are committed to, that you're going to have to trade away. And there's multiple guys with no trade clauses. And then you've got all these players that you've developed that this is around the time that you could have anticipated them coming up. So I guess, what was he thinking?
Well, there's I think a couple different angles to it, right? Like, one is that and this goes back to the thing I keep looking at is that I feel like the search for value, right, has overridden just like, okay, if I go to the grocery store, right, and I'm looking around and it could be just about anything. It could be cereal, it could be pasta, it could be cheese, whatever, right? Like, I've got a lot of options when I go in there. I could buy the more expensive name brand, like I could get the fresh pasta, or I could buy, oh, hey, the generic store brand is on sale. And so I'm going to buy that because I need pasta. I'm going to cook it. I'm going to put sauce on it, whatever. Is there really a difference? And for all intents and purposes, there's really not, if I'm just making a meal for my family on a Thursday night or something. But if I'm having company over, if I'm expecting to put together a truly great meal, I'm going to have to get the more expensive ingredients because they truly are better, right? Versus just what I'm going to feed my kids. The Hoyer has assembled a roster that is Thursday night dinner at home with the family.
More like Tuesday night, but yeah.
But it's fine. Like I said, it's good. They can win games, and if they actually at times they look fun to watch, but they are not going to be able to go up against the best teams over the course of the season and certainly into the playoffs. And I think that's what it comes down to is the only reason they ended up with Shota Imanaga is because his asking price ended up being like half of what everybody projected. People thought he was going to get $100 million. Cody Bellinger, initially, the rumors were that he wanted $200 million. I feel like Hoyer ended up ended up signing him because it appeared to be a great value relative to what it should have looked like. Horner's on an extension. That's a deal. Swanson, even though it's the second largest contract they've ever signed as an organization, was the fourth rated shortstop in that market and signed for much less than any of the other three. So it's more about the value of the deal perceived than it is the actual deal itself. And that's where I feel like, he stockpiled all this stuff, right? It's like a hoarder or like somebody going through the whatever and just picking up stuff that he doesn't necessarily need, but it's a good deal. So he's buying it. And then he's stuck with a roster that he can't move around.
And to me, that circles us back to Ricketts, right? And so the real question here is this Ricketts saying, listen, you got to go get the best value you can? I don't believe it is, because they ended up over the threshold for the salary cap threshold. And so, I mean, they're spending money. They're just not spending it intelligently. And the funny thing is for the past 3+ years, all we've heard about is we want to spend intelligently. And yet you look at the roster, you're over the cap, and you guys have won. What'd they win? 86 games,
83
games?
For the second year in a row, 83.
And so it's like, no, you've told us that you want to spend intelligently. And look, you've got an 83 win team 2 years in a row. You're stuck with a roster full of guys you're committed to, several with no trade clauses. You're over the cap. I mean, that is actually the definition of not spending intelligently.
Right. Yeah, and that's what I say. You'd be better off in a lot of cases. And that's why, again, you'd be better off having a Bryce Harper or, insert superstar here, a guy who you're paying a ton of money to, because then, you have that higher level of performance, right? You're paying for better production, a more marquee face and name and endorsements and things like that.
Yeah.
But I guess, again, the part where I just keep running into a wall, right, is kind of what we were just talking about earlier. And I don't mean to belabor it, but it's like, you look at this and you say, they have to upgrade. This is the other fun thing was, like, I had a thread about this. So it was like, you make it sound like it's so easy. Like it's just all, I'm like, no, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's necessary. They have to get better. They have to find upgrade players. But how? Because again, they've got these top prospects, these guys we really think could be very good. But the issue is the timeline. If, again, like I said earlier, if we were looking at, say, 2026 is when they want to be competitive, 27, then you'd be fine with figuring out ways to move some of these guys, bringing up the young dudes, let them struggle, let them see, sink or swim, figure out where they need to be. But if you're trying to turn this into a 90-win team this next season, 2025, how are you doing that? Like, can you trust that you can slot? Because, like you said, the prospects are ready. Moises Ballesteros does not need more time at AAA to figure it out. Matt Shaw does not need more time. Owen Casey doesn't need more time. We already saw Alcantara up. That was because he was already on the 40-man roster. Like Cade Horton, if he's healthy, and I have serious questions about that, as I shared on the last pod. But what are you doing with those guys? Because they don't need more time in the minors. But as I noted earlier, you also can't put them in and say, I guarantee this player is going to be better than the guy he replaces. Because, as rookies don't always just come up as many people suddenly, thought PCA was a bust because he didn't, win a Gold Glove in 19 plate appearances and didn't look good in 19 plate appearances that first year, right? As, oh, this guy sucks. And then they thought he sucked after the first half. Well, clearly that's not true. He just needed to adjust. Can you win 90 games if you bring 3 or 4 guys up and they all have similar struggles for a half? No, you can't. But you also can't build a contender into the future if you can't bring those young guys up and have them succeed and be better than the players who they're replacing. So it is this catch-22 that I'm not envious. Like I'm openly admitting, like, I'm not trying to say I'm smarter than Hoyer. I'm not saying, "Ooh, I would do this, this, and this," because I don't know what the hell I would do. I am not envious of the situation that the front office is in heading into this winter, because who do you trade? Either way, who do you
They're going to
replace? What
have
do
to
you do there?
DFA some guys. They already have.
Yeah, I mean they're definitely gonna move, and most of those, like, there's a bunch of, Trey Wingenter and Adbert Alzolay is going to be done. Yency Almonte is going to be done. It's going to be a lot of, and they're going to need to spend money. I do expect them to actually go get some multi-year guys like Carlos Estevez. I think is one of them they'll look at. I think Clay Holmes is another one they're going to look at, like legit closer types, whether they're going to replace Porter Hodge or at least have guys who have ninth inning experience that they can slot in and have. And then, you should have Julian Merriweather back. So now all of a sudden you're looking at like 7th, 8th, 9th being locked in quite a bit better. I think they absolutely will spend there. I think, and if I had to get down to it, with what we've said about the actual position players, I do think, and this has been the case for a while, they're going to highly prioritize pitching. Whether that's Max Fried or Walker Buehler, I think they're going to be heavily involved with those guys. I do believe they're going to spend a lot of more money than usual, which is not saying much because it's almost nothing in the bullpen, but more than usual on the bullpen. And then I think they're going to let some things sort themselves out on the position player front. I mean, Nico Horner, had forearm surgery. He's probably not going to be ready right away. That does at least give you the ability to. That's the other thing. People are like, trade Nico. Well, I don't know if you're trading a dude who just had forearm surgery. Like, good luck trying to move him during the winter before he's had a chance to rehab and come back. But I think they'll look to shop Bellinger. I think they would probably look to shop Paredes. Could they move Suzuki and or Happ if those guys are amenable to it? Like, it'd have to be the right situation, but maybe they're going to have to make some aggressive moves.
And if they shop
Even if it's
Bellinger,
just a clear space.
are they going to have to eat some of the?
Oh, I'm sure
some
they
of his
will.
salary.
I'm sure they will. I
Yeah, and so
wonder.
what are you getting back? Like probably
Yeah,
nothing.
and
And
that's
you're gonna have to
right.
eat some.
Little salary relief and then some space, which I think, But I mean, hey, the Yankees they just lost their primary first baseman. Would they be looking to get Bellinger because hey, that lefty bat with that short porch? I mean, I could see that being something, and he'd be a tremendous upgrade over Anthony Rizzo at this point in their careers, respectively. Right? Can you make something like that work to where you're picking up a couple of prospects and taking some of the salary off the books so you can go attack some of those other dudes who I just mentioned, free up that spot. Again, now you've got Casey that you can put out there. Bush can stay where he is, or he slides over to second. You have somebody else come up, or Matt Shaw comes up and plays second. That's what I would actually like to see. I'd love to see him trade Bellinger, get whatever from the Yankees. Actually, I'd love to see him then sign Anthony Santander, but I don't think that's going to happen. Suzuki, Casey, Bush stays at first, Shaw plays second, bing, bang, boom, trade Paredes, and then Shaw goes over to third when Horner comes back, and you deal with the fallout from there. I would personally like to see that happen. I highly doubt that's the route they'll take.
Yeah.
But that is one way that they can at least free up a spot and some money, both of which I think are relatively important.
So the deadline is Monday, 4 p.m. Central time?
Yeah. 4 Central, 5 Eastern. Yep.
And then once we get there, it's kind of like all the decisions that need to be made, all the option decisions, 60-day IL designations, and then free agents get the ability to start negotiating with teams. That's when the real fire starts to get lit under the hot stove. And then you start to move forward from there and see. I mean, there'll be some small deals probably done right away, but like Juan Soto is going to be the big deal, right? That's kind of like hanging out there in the market. But I mean, the pitchers might start right away, right? In terms of like different pitcher signings and things like that. Are they able to talk? They're able to talk to teams, right? They just aren't able.
Not yet.
Are they able to talk?
They can only negotiate with their quote unquote current team until Monday. Okay. So deals can be made. The GM meetings are this week coming up too. So, I mean, I think something I just wrote up today too, based on not so much Cubs centric, but like the Cardinals are looking to shed a ton of salary and trade a bunch of dudes, all of whom have no trade clauses. So we're talking Nolan Arenado, Wilson Contreras, Sonny Gray. The Cubs can and should be very involved in the trade market. What I wonder is if that, and that's only two teams, but with them both being in the Central, that it's not like they're going to be dealing with each other most likely. But how much of that starts getting moved, knowing that like it's Juan Soto, like last year was like Shohei Ohtani and a giant gap, and then whomever else, and this is going to be the same thing except with Soto, is like how much of that then sort of shifts to where it's like, all right, he's on his own island. Not to mention the fact that he's really probably only negotiating with 3 to maybe 4 teams, at most. So it's like I don't think he'll slow the market up as much. I would anticipate seeing a bunch of these other teams get involved in some of these trades, trying to step up and trying to get some of this done sooner during the GM meetings. I think the winter meetings are like maybe like December 8th through 10th. So I would say like in the next, month and change, I do think we see a lot of stuff happening. And I would expect the Cubs to be pretty involved in it early because, as I said, like Hoyer has to be aggressive. If he sits back and does the same value-based, wait for the market to come to us thing, it's not going to work. I mean, okay, maybe it will, right? I don't want to say it's not going to work, but I find this needle threading crap is you could very well end up just completely missing the boat. I think if he's going to make the moves to make this a 90-win team, it has to be through early, aggressive moves to attack this market, to find a couple of spots. And I think that stuff could happen within the next month. And in order for them to know then from that point, what other moves can it make? So I think this will be a faster moving, not necessarily free agency, but as far as like off-season moves and trades and that sort of thing, I think we'll see that hot stove get lit up and cooking a bit sooner than maybe what we've seen the last few seasons.
Yeah. All right. Well, it should be good. We look forward to whatever's going to happen here, and we'll circle back in a couple of weeks. We try to keep it every couple of weeks, depending on our availability, but or as things transpire in the off season. Hopefully, as you just said, there's a lot of activity and the Cubs are involved in it. So I guess we'll just have to see how that plays out. But until our next episode, it's been great. It's been good.
Yeah.
And hopefully it gets better.
Something. Yeah. Well, knock wood.
Knock on wood, everyone. All right. That's it for us today. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you.